Well, good morning. It's my deep privilege this morning to present to you and to introduce to you the president of the SSAT this year, Jennifer Tseng. It's the clicker, right? There we go. Okay, good. Jennifer was born in Berkeley, California, to Raymond and Rose Tseng, who have compelling stories in and of themselves as Asian immigrants. Her Chinese name, which I would not try to pronounce myself, means much precious jade. And I think you can see, even in this very young picture of Jennifer, both the curiosity and the compassion that she's grown up to manifest in so many ways. Here you see her with her younger brother, Frank, who is 2 years younger than Jennifer. Academics was very important to Jennifer's family. Her maternal grandparents were both physicians. One was a surgeon. Her grandfather was a surgeon in Taiwan, and they eventually immigrated to the United States and finished their careers here in Northern California. At the time of her birth, Jennifer's mom, Rose, was pursuing a PhD in nutrition, and she would go on to her own esteemed career as an academic and as a leader in academic institutions. This is an early picture of Jennifer beginning her skills in baking and cooking, which have persisted until adulthood as she continues to enjoy cooking for her family, for her friends, and for her colleagues. As a young child, Jennifer developed many broad interests. She was an avid reader in particular, and her mother describes her often reading at night beyond curfew in the bedroom with a flashlight. And in fact, when they moved from the home, I think this was the home in San Jose where they had moved and where Jennifer went to school, they found a number of books under her mattress still from those nighttime reading episodes. When Jennifer was 13, she wrote an assignment for school which was called My Family Tree. I'm privileged to have a copy of this. It's 50 pages long, handwritten, perfect, no errors, with a 2-page handwritten bibliography. And one of the pages describes her heroes, which you can see here. And if you read the characteristics of these heroes, what you will see is the roots of her deep and abiding moral compass. So I have to step away from the mic to read it a bit, but Thomas Jefferson, it says, refused to be above other people, was not snobbish. Chris Everett Lloyd puts family before career. Bill Cosby, and of course this was an earlier generation, loves and helps kids, sees the lighter side of life. Elizabeth Blackwell, scientist, first woman doctor who was determined. Mother Teresa helps the poor, the hungry, the diseased. Benjamin Franklin didn't let public opinion bother him. And I think if you think about these characteristics that she listed at age 13, this really is who Jennifer Tseng is today. As an adolescent, she continued to develop many interests. In high school, she was a musician. She played violin and piano, including in the California Youth Symphony. In high school, she participated in musical theater, in the debate society, and of course, she was involved with sports as well, including tennis, as you can see on this slide. Now, her career evolved as follows on this slide. She attended Stanford undergraduate. At that point, she was considering seriously becoming a physician and was encouraged by some to do a 6-year accelerated program, many of which existed at that point. But Jennifer wanted to do liberal arts, so she matriculated at Stanford both as an English major and in human biology, and she wrote an English thesis as well. She then went to her first choice for medical school, University of California, San Francisco, and that school was of particular interest to her because of its broad diversity of patient population. Now, I think when she entered UCSF, surgery was not top of mind, but once she encountered many of the surgical mentors and heroes that we know from that department in that era, and in particular, Dr. Nancy Asher, she was convinced that surgery was the career for her. If you'd like to hear more about that relationship, this afternoon at 2 o'clock, Dr. Singh is going to be interviewing Dr. Asher in the Heroes of GI Surgery session, and I would encourage you, that will be a fascinating conversation, and we'll unpackage this part of Jennifer's development, I'm sure. She then went on to train at the Massachusetts General Hospital. She did a fellowship in surgical oncology at MD Anderson, was the chief resident at the MGH, and also pursued an MPH at the Harvard School of Public Health. And this is her graduating class from MD Anderson. I'm sure you all recognize others in addition to Jennifer that you know in this photograph. Now, during medical school, Jennifer was a Howard Hughes Scholar, and one of the characteristics of the Howard Hughes Scholarship is that every summer, all of the Howard Hughes Scholars from across the country come together in Chevy Chase for, I guess, a week or so of group encounters and work and sharing their research. And it was at that event during the summer of her Howard Hughes Fellowship that Jennifer met who she refers to as her life partner, Mark Sabatine, a physician from New York, an Italian family, obviously, who was at Harvard Medical School at the time. There clearly was a spark in that initial encounter, and they began at least some dating and stayed in touch through the ensuing years. In fact, when they were both residents at the MGH, Mark described to me that every night there was a tradition at 9 o'clock of all of the house officers who were on call that night to eat dinner together, usually in two pods, the medical pod and the surgical pod. The medical pod and the surgical pod. And Mark found the conversation at the surgical pod more interesting than the medical pod, so he spent more time over there. It might also be that that's where Jennifer was on many occasions. But this was part of their developing relationship. And then wedding bells rang in 2000 when they got married, both as residents. And shortly thereafter, their family began once Jennifer was a faculty member at University of Massachusetts. And from that point forward, they pursued the crazy, difficult, hectic life of two high-powered academics that were both very, very committed to their family. Mark freely describes the fact that Jennifer was the logistics expert in this endeavor, particularly when the children were young, organizing nannies, activities, and all sorts of things. And this really is one of the characteristics that people describe about Jennifer. She is able to seemingly do it all with tremendous ease and grace. And this was particularly true for the family. And they did indeed invest in the family. You can see in these photographs many trips and times together and the obvious joy on their faces. Here they are in Hawaii enjoying some time together. And for Jennifer, the importance of family is great. Here you can see Matteo doing some bedtime reading, perhaps before the lights went out, and perhaps beginning a career in medicine. Now, I hope that there was a copy of Cameron's surgery text as well to go with this so that Matteo could think about surgery in addition to medicine. I don't know. But indeed, family has been very, very important to Jennifer and Mark in their development. Mark currently is an esteemed academic in his own right. He is the Lewis Dexter Distinguished Chair in Cardiovascular Medicine and professor at Harvard Medical School, practicing at the Brigham. Now, Jennifer has many accomplishments. She made me promise that I would make this introduction short. So this is only a small piece of the many things that Jennifer has accomplished in her career. I would point out, however, that she was the first professor of surgery at the BI Deaconess who was a female, and she was only the fourth full professor of surgery at the Harvard Medical School in 2016 and 2017. And of course, she assumed the James Utley Professor and Chair of Surgery at Boston University Medical School in 2017, where she is still Surgeon-in-Chief. There are many characteristics that we could describe about Jennifer and her success. One, and here's some additional important achievements that she's had. She was co-director of the Surgical Outcomes Analysis and Research Unit at the BID. She has done many, many things with the SUS, the SSAT, founding member of the Society of Asian Academic Surgeons, and many activities with the American Board of Surgery as well. Dr. Seng is determined. That's one characteristic that is very clear. I use this as a little bit of an illustration. During COVID, we all had to restrict our activities, but Jennifer was not willing to restrict the visiting professor and other programs at her institution. So here you can see that she continued with these activities, but just followed the rules with masks and separation. This is another example. I've heard tell of a barbecue in her backyard where it was cool, so she had to produce, heat and fire and so forth, so that she could still have the activity for a visiting professor even in the midst of COVID. Again, indicating the fact that she is determined. She is also a connector. You can see many, many photographs, social media and other places where she shares her joy in getting people together, learning from others, and sharing time together. But perhaps her most endearing and important quality is her empathy and her care for others. I think this manifests itself in two very, very key and important ways. One is the fact that she cares deeply about her patients, and they all see and feel and recognize that. The other is that she invests heavily in her faculty and her residents and her students. Here you can see her with the residents on rounds. This is reflected in many ways. In the operating room, she makes sure she knows everybody's first name and refers to them by their first name. She invests in all of her residents and junior faculty's career, and she puts that first, certainly above even her own career. So Jennifer has been a fantastic president of the Society of Surgery of the Alimentary Tract, and I introduce for you Dr. Jennifer Seng. Jennifer, podium is yours.
Shenanigans going on. Well, thank you very much. I have a, if I can get the slides working, I have a little bit of an announcement. There's interesting things going on here. It's like, we're in the matrix. Okay. So I was going to say, my slides are advancing, but they're not advancing here. Okay. I was going to make a joke that after that kind of an introduction, I only wish my mother were here to hear it, except she actually, at midnight last night, she had a little bit of a cough, and I made her test for COVID, and lo and behold, it was positive until he bullied me to take my mask off. That's why we're wearing masks, but everyone else is asymptomatic. But my mother's hopefully watching this the live stream at the Chicago Hilton instead of being here. So here, excuse me, some cheat notes. The SSAT is my meeting, so I'm going to start by giving thanks in case they come with the hook, since we have limited time. The SSAT has always been my organization. It's the first surgical group that took me in, And in my third year in the basic science milieu, when I was desperate to publish an abstract, I basically conned my PIs, Dr. Richard Mulligan and Dr. Judah Folkman, into thinking the other wanted me to present at a surgical meeting, and so that's how I ended up at the SSAT and DDW, and the rest is history. But I will say that I have many sponsors and maybe even promoters in the SSAT, and the first one was David Ratner. When he heard I was going to this meeting, he took me in, he introduced me to people like Barbara Bass, and he introduced me to Jeff Matthews and to David Mavi and all kinds of people in the SSAT, and I will be forever grateful. This is a recent picture, his living his best life. But I met so many people from the SSAT, many of whom I'm honored are here today. I cannot possibly list them all. These are just some representative pictures of people that have taken me in without being my mentor, without being at any of my institutions, just because of this organization, which is why this organization is so valuable. This is a dinner in 2022 for Mark Callery's second year of his SSAT presidency felt like a pregnancy for him, I'm sure. That was mostly outside. We came inside for this picture, but this was the Boston-based contingent and many friends and their partners, their long-suffering partners through the SSAT. So thank you to the SSAT. You heard, but you know, the SSAT is not us. The SSAT is who I met yesterday. So this is who we met yesterday. The residents and fellows presenting, you are the SSAT. This is your meeting. This is your future. So our job is to make it the meeting and the society that you want. So thank you for teaching all of us. So as you heard, I went to UCSF, and before I even dreamed I'd be a surgeon, Dr. Asher, who will be our professor, as you heard, and then Dr. DeBass and Schechter and Schrock and Hunt, who fired my imagination at Boston City Hospital for the first time, they really inspired me. But I will say it was a guy named Marco Patti, a guy named Marco Patti, who was my chief resident, and then later a junior attending when I was back on as a fifth year, who really fired me up about GI surgery, would not take no for an answer, and told me that I could be a surgeon and I could be a GI surgeon. In fact, I must, in a Sicilian way, imperiously told me that I was going to do that. So I'll be forever grateful for that. And he's in, I think, Bordeaux with the getting an award. But through him, I learned from his mentors, even if I didn't interact with him that much, the late President, Dr. Larry Way, and of course, Dr. Pellegrini, who was already up in the Pacific Northwest at that time. So I'll be forever grateful for San Francisco. And then coming to the East Coast, you know, at Mass General, the late departed Jerry Austin and the wonderful, alive, well, and self-described rickety Les Ottinger, they took me in, and I'll be forever grateful. Dr. Warshaw and Dr. Ferguson had to make the best of me, and they did the best they could with what they got. So I'll always be grateful. And back on Team 5, Barely Alive, I was introduced to Carlos Fernandez del Castillo, who was the most important clinical mentor of mine during my residency, and is actually my godfather. So he's important in a lot of ways. And then again, it's the people that you train with, your family, your co-residents, the people that become your family, thicker than blood in some ways that are with us along this journey. And then I added a second family to this when I was lucky enough to go to Houston, where I learned many things from my teachers at MD Anderson, of course, among them Dr. Pisters and Dr. Vote and Dr. Lee, all the medical oncologists, radiation oncologists. The one that imprinted me the most was this guy with that boat, Dr. Doug Evans. He just, something about, I basically lightly stalked him until he actually took pity on me and gave me some research projects, but his way of thinking, his way of the multidisciplinary care of taking care of the patient. You're the surgeon, but that doesn't mean you're a hammer. Surgery is the tool that you deploy, and you're a doctor first and foremost. That has stuck with me and stuck with many of us here in the audience. We have all drunk that particular Kool-Aid. And again, it's my fellow fellows, it's my fellow trainees who are my families, my brothers, they're brothers here, but brothers and sisters in this, and I'm grateful for all of this. So you always remember the guy who actually changed you from somebody who was unemployed to somebody who was employed, and that for me will always be Giles Whalen. Giles Whalen gave me a job when I didn't have a job yet in April of my second year of fellowship, took me in at UMass, made a home for me, let me become an HPB surgeon, let me grow, and everybody at UMass from Giles on down, from the nurses to the scrub techs to everybody, these are all of our partners in the UMass Walk for Cancer. I became a mother there, will always be my home, and then of course we grew SOAR there. Here are some of the original suspects from SOAR 1.0 with some transition into Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center from the research. As you can see at the top but the middle is Mateo holding the two balls trying to decide which one to throw at me. This is not either a political or matrix statement. And that one at the top is Natalie's first meeting in Chicago at SSAT in Chicago. So, but friends, where would we be without our friends? We would be nowhere. I am so lucky to have so many of them. You know, I basically was so lucky in all of them. They support us wherever we're at. They help us. They lift us up. There are too many people that are important in my life. Many of them are in this room. Many of them some of them are trapped on tarmacs, and some of them are ill. But so many of you're all here, and I'm renewed by all this, and I hope this for all of the fellows. Oops, sorry, I'm not good at this. And I will just say before I get into this. Again, I think I'll go into this later, but I'm so privileged to be at the institution that I'm at, and so most of the rest of my talk is about BU and BMC, but I hope it represents SSAT. So this is the part of the talk where the men start to cry, and so we'll see how this happens, but I will, as my favorite book is The Lord of the Rings, and Gandalf says, not all tears are an evil. So, as you heard from Mark Talamini, my mother, Rose, and my late dad, Ray, came to the United States, as did my stepfather, Singh, and his late wife, Margaret. They came in the 1960s after the Chinese Exclusion Act finally expired. Dr. Tevye Sachs reminds me that yesterday was the anniversary of the enactment of the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1892. In my report that Dr. Talamini read, at one point there are only 54 Chinese people of Chinese descent that were allowed per year to come into the United States. And so that was the history of our country, and there's much more to our country that we know and that we are learning about. So I'm ever grateful that it was rescinded and that my family was able to come here as Americans. My parents' American dream had us having choices in whatever it is in career, in where we would live, in our faith, and how we would live. And I will mention that my stepfather, Singh, and my mother, Rose, have wonderfully found love in their widowhood and have a blended family with 3 children and 5 perfect grandchildren, so they are living their best lives. So, Dr. Mark Sabatine, love of my life, thank you for being here in every way. Mark is the true academic powerhouse in our family, and we have been funded in our family from the NIH continuously since the 2000s. So, my dear husband, thank you for hitching my wagon to your star, and love you. Thank you so much. And thank you for being such a wonderful father to our children. Mateo and Nat, I know you hate it when I talk about you, and God forbid I post about you. Your father and I are both extraordinarily proud of you. Thank you for being teenagers that will mostly talk to us, but mostly thank you for being good human beings that care about others and care about our world. So this is for Mark Talamini, I guess. So when Mateo was in 2nd grade, on his locker at school, one of the other boys had, when I grow up, I want to be a Red Sox player. When I grow up, I want to be a Bruins player. Mateo had this, unbeknownst to me. He said, when I grow up, I want to be a cancer surgeon because I like to help people. So this is his version of a patient on a gurney and a knife, which resembles our vegetable serrated knife, but he thought it was a scalpel. And so he has gone back and forth on this, and we are definitely not holding him to his choice of career. He doesn't even have to be a cardiologist, but still. And then Natalie likes my name tag. She's always stealing them. In fact, I don't know where my name tag is now. But this is when she was about 7. I had taken Mateo to the American Pancreatic Association. She was dissatisfied with my name tag and made the name to her satisfaction. And when she was in 2nd grade. So I will say that everything that I do is framed through the eyes of my children, and that is enough for me. And even everything I do at work is framed for what will be good for them or what would be good for people like them. So you heard a little bit about SOAR. SOAR is now run by Dr. Tevye Sachs and the research residents at BMC, and it's better than it ever has been before. But at SOAR, we like to come up with, when we have an idea, we like to come up with a dummy abstract first. We like to figure out how we're going to tell a story. And so these are some of the people that currently participate in SOAR as a not exclusive list at all. But if we're going to talk about opening the door for the SSAT and for surgery, how would we do that? What would our dummy abstract look like? Well, we would have some kind of a hypothesis. We would have a, what's the state of the field? What's the preliminary data? We'd have some methods involved, and we'd have some projected results. So what I want to talk about is that my hypothesis is that society, our society, the field of surgery, and the SSAT is at a crossroads. Our problem is, like, who are we? Who are we as an organization? Who are we as a field? As a preliminary data, I interviewed my interns as an example, and my methods are that the SSAT needs to do something. It's a call to action. So who are we as a field? Who are we surgeons? Or in other ways, back in my day, this is Boston City Hospital. What a beautiful hospital it was. What a beautiful picture hangs in my office. It's also beautiful now. But now it looks very different, and it functions much better for today than it did back in 1864 when it was founded. I don't know how many of you have seen this. This is a picture, a post that Patricia Turner put up. These are 5 very accomplished women, many of whom you know, and it can elicit strong reactions. A picture like this, unseen. There was a presentation by Jenny Zhang yesterday in the Residents and Fellows Conference asking the old story about a boy goes to the hospital because he's in a car crash with his father, and his father dies, and the surgeon says, "I can't operate, it's my son," and who is it? And most of us now have been coached enough that we know the answers, that the surgeon is the kid's mother. Most of us. But that's coaching. What's our initial reaction when we haven't been coached, when we don't say the right thing, what's our initial response? And I think that's interesting. So the SSAT, has many, many strengths. It's a historic organization with extraordinary resources. We have a prestigious membership, famous people. We have a historic and fruitful and profitable relationship with GDW, and which has our GI friends close, cutting edge technologies, companies all come here, and we learn about multidisciplinary care. But together with our other sibling surgical organizations, we have challenges. Many of our constituents have to make hard decisions about where they spend their money or where they go. And as Tom McGilvery, the current president of the Society for Thoracic Surgeons, told me once, Dr. Jerry Austin told him, the days when the trucks showed up every Monday and dumped gold in the lawn of the department of surgery are over. It's even more over now. Surgeons today have limited time and opportunities for scientific engagement, let alone the socio-political aspects of surgical societies and national meetings. The triple threat of surgeon, scientist, and clinician is no longer attainable or desired by most of our trainees and our young faculty. And changing societal norms and work-life balance discussions are upon us. The buy one, get two model of a doctor who works endless hours and yet somehow, at least up here, is told to always make it to every single baseball game that his son plays, and the devoted stay-at-home partner who makes it all happen without complaint is less and less applicable today. Our beloved organization, SSAT, has both unique challenges and substantial real opportunities. We're sound fiscally, we have renewable resources, and we're the envy of our peer societies. We have the ability to maintain a cheap registration and a very inexpensive dues, and we need to use these resources. Also, the broad nature of the SSAT, comprising general surgery, the abdominal wall, and the tract from esophagus to anus, allows for collaborations between different subspecialty groups. This is useful both if you're a community surgeon or if you want to be a chair or a leader in surgery. If you only specialize in your tiny subspecialty area, you're unlikely to lead. It's also less useful if you're in the military or you're a community surgeon or you do endoscopy in your practice. Excuse me. So finally, surgery, like the rest of the world, is diversifying, and we are rethinking who we are. So I'm trying to speed up a little because of the time. So insidiously, there are tensions between old and new. What does a surgeon look like? Who's a leader? The old guard sometimes remembers the old days, uphill but back both ways. What's professionalism? What do millennials want? What's okay for a boomer? What about openly loaded phrases like meritocracy, qualified, affirmative action, or even diverse. People find diversity and equity inclusion in the American College of Surgeons somehow a controversial topic. But people are afraid to talk on every side, and not having an open discourse can lead to submerged tension, resentment, and possibly eventually open conflict, as noted by the recent presidential address in a different surgical society. And also responses, at least online, to a diverse slate of interns at Stanford University. Assumptions on any side can be lethal. Conversations between surgical leaders who respect each other is critical, and listening is more important than getting your own point of view across loudly. So I ask, who looks like a surgeon? What is professionalism? Can we define meritocracy? And with the shock of the new, can we get beyond these loaded phrases and arguments? People can be afraid to talk, and not talking openly can lead to simmering tensions and eruptions. Assumptions can be lethal, and conversation is critical. I'm framing our BMC interns, excuse me, you get to see all the cute pictures again. Am I doing this in the right direction? Yes. No, I'm going the wrong way. See, I need an intern, resident. Sorry. These are our 6 BMC categorical interns this year. I asked them what they love about surgery, what they're worried about, and what they needed from a surgical society. They are individuals with their own homes, their own names, and their identities. Emily Eakin is from Vermont. She loves visual spatial challenges and to be busy. She thinks about how to handle bad outcomes, and she doesn't know anything about surgical organizations. She wants to do surgical oncology, she told us, but now she's very interested in trauma. Colton Yan is from Florida. He's our first BMC resident in the military match. He's in the Air Force, as is Phoebe Ochere, who will join us next. His wife is the pediatric nurse at Children's Hospital, and when he was on for Christmas, she asked to be on shift so that they could celebrate Christmas together with their families later. He's interested in trauma, vascular, or general surgery. Jeffrey Melvin is from Ohio. He's from a surgical family. He played tennis at BC and is highly interested in academic medicine. He wants a surgical organization to help him meet people with different perspectives, and he loves to travel and wants to meet international surgeons. Abdi Majid Muhammad is from Somalia and Maine. He couples matched with his wife, who's an outstanding BMC medicine resident who's interested in cardiology. And Majid wants to be a pediatric surgeon at an academic center with a diverse patient population. Coachen Maneb de Macedo is from Minnesota and Wisconsin. She's deeply invested in national and global access for care for underserved patient populations. She seeks a surgical organization to network and establish connections in both nationally and internationally. She's debating between tax and surgical oncology. Kai Anderson is from Memphis, Tennessee. She's a former dancer and she loves the art in surgery. She is open to either community or academic surgery. She's interested in plastics or trauma and burns, and she hopes for a return to the South, specifically Tennessee or Texas. So what can the SSAT do for them and people like them? So first, academic success and leadership. This is our sweet spot. We still want to serve the traditional SSAT constituency better. Now we need networking beyond the traditional apprenticeship, who you know, who taps you on the shoulder, which is often the luck of the draw and leads to patronage and inequities. International connections and global paths to global surgery, they want that. Manib in particular made it, but they all mentioned it. SSAT is building new chapters. Dr. Vote, Dr. Hassan have done so much work, and many of our new leaders are here today. Around the world, we have SSAT growing with more international surgeons toward the goal of an international president, in my book, in the next 5 years. For community and military surgery, who's going to go into community surgery? We at BMC graduated somebody who goes into community service or military service at least one every year or two, which we're proud of. It means that they can go straight in without the need for a fellowship. How can we both serve those individuals as opposed to all of us that are in the ivory tower? And then geography, culture, identity, and faith. We want all of us to be able to bring our true selves in to what we do for work. And whether or not it's Kaya with her green and pink umbrella, where people were mystified by her sorority umbrella from her traditionally black sorority at KA in Boston, and she actually seeks perhaps to go home to the South someday, or somebody needed to explain in my office that actually the veggie pizza deluxe that has pepperoni is actually not halal, and actually I couldn't eat it for Lent either. I mean, again, people make mistakes, but just being able to explain them. More importantly, not having a major diversity symposium at on Eid is again, we all make mistakes. We just need to learn from them and not be defensive. So we all come from different points of view. We have different cultures and beliefs. It's okay to be wrong. It's okay to be ignorant. We have to be willing to ask questions, to possibly offend, but then to learn and not be defensive for the next time. And we also need to forgive generously when people don't mean to offend. So, and then there's the work and personal life. I hate the words balance and I hate the words integration, so I'll use fulfillment. Jeff, of all of them, is the most classic appearing from the outside of the surgical model. Academic surgery, surgical family, et cetera, wants to do academic surgery. He, in his write-up, said the most. I want to live where my fiance wants. I worry about not spending enough time with my fiance. And I applaud that. I will say that it's not just the women that benefit from parental policies. Discussion, okay? It is not. Discussions about women in surgery should not be limited to childcare, pregnancy, and lactation. That personal and work balance is not, people that do not have children also are entitled to have, people that are not married are entitled to have personal time. This is not about one issue. So in personal, people that are able to, diversity, equity, and inclusion is not for the benefit of those people that are minoritized in that conversation. Diversity, equity, inclusion benefits the whole. It benefits the majority. It's not a largesse given to members of that selected group. We all benefit from listening to others, especially when it gets us out of our comfort zone. So, this is the call to action. We need to open the door. From an international perspective, we need to actively recruit and respect and listen to our international members and create global opportunities for all of us. From a community and military perspective, we need to welcome and embrace our community surgeons. So Ellen and Jayraj, this is for you. We need to welcome our community surgeons and their trainees. Most of our graduates are going to have some interaction beyond the ivory tower. We need to develop programs that help the members of our armed services, our military doctors, because even if we're not serving, there's a way that we can serve our country and serve them. We need to be willing to have a diversity of thought and open discourse on all arenas. We need to say the difficult part out loud and not be so afraid that we're going to be jumped down our throat that we keep everything inside and don't have any honest discussions. We need to learn to disagree, as Joe Beisky says, to learn to disagree without being disagreeable. We need to connect with other surgical societies. We're going to have a GI surgery summit that the SSAT is going to sponsor with other members that are going to actively participate. The SSO and the Society of University Surgeons have signed on as full active members. We will involve local regional societies. We will ask the leadership and the top trainees from the meetings from SAGES and HPBA and ASCARS, et cetera, to participate. It will be a small group to sit and have a white paper as to what we need to do to move forward. We are much more aligned in these surgical societies than we are disparate, and as our members need to pick and choose, we need to figure out how we can serve our memberships that will help all of our society's missions. So finally, our nominations and appointments. For the SSAT, and I speak on my own behalf and not on behalf of the SSAT or the board, so we will have some interesting discussions. Right now, our appointments are often presidential and they're arbitrary. I do like the nominations, self-nominations, but that being said, it is often your approach as the president-elect, okay, who do you elevate? I think there should be mandatory chair of the committee review is how active has this person been? How useful are they to the goals of the SSAT? I think that should be important, not just presidential appointment. I think people that are not effective should potentially decide whether or not that is actually a committee they want to say yes to. Our committees are large, unwieldy, and overlapping. This is largely the fault of leadership. We haven't given the committees clear mandates of what they're supposed to do, so therefore it's hard to know what you're supposed to do. So after this meeting, I move that the chair of the board, who will be me, and the officers and the board evaluate the committee functions, the structure, the size of the committees, what the mandate is from the leadership, and the support. What does the board need to do to support the committees in what they do? And nominations. The nominating, as we have seen in all these surgical organizations, it can be quite opaque, and it sometimes is also paradoxically pro forma. I move that we add members to the nominating committee. For SSAT, the nominating committee is the 3 past presidents, I believe, 2 at-large members. One, by tradition, 1 at-large member is the vice president, so there's 1 at-large member. And I have not been a member of the nominating committee yet, but I am told that it is not always, like all 5 people on the nominating committee do not necessarily have an equal voice. I move that we suggest expanding the nominating committee, potentially to include 2 other individuals, potentially the chair of the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Committee and the chair of the Young Faculty, Young Members Committee, but I leave this up to the board to decide. But I do submit that we need both transparency, relative transparency, as well as respecting our traditions of organizations like the SSAT. So this is my dad and my mom and Natalie at her first communion, which is in May of 2016. And of course, Mark, my parents-in-law, Matt and Lee, and Mateo and I were on the other side of the table. And we were all so happy, and my dad was, this is like how I like to remember him. He was wearing his Brooks Brothers suit with his little American, when Brooks Brothers was still in Massachusetts, with his American flag on his lapel. And so my dad worked hard his whole life. He wasn't the best necessarily communicator, my mom will say early on, but he tried and he listened, and he loved this country, and he said that this country just opened so many doors for him. He was he was proud of his kids, but I think he was most proud of actually being an American. He would study every single election like nobody's business. That's why I was sort of interested in people early on. He would study so hard, he'd make a very thoughtful decision. He voted in every single election. He voted early in the last election before he had cardiac surgery. And so I think that people opened doors for him, people opened doors for us to come to this country. But you know, sometimes people open doors for you and you don't even know why. They don't even know you, and you don't even know them. So I happen to be the first Asian American president of the SSAT. Did you know that? I'm the first Asian president of the SSAT. I'm the first Asian female officer of the SSAT. But I'm not the first female officer. I'm not the first Asian officer of the SSAT. That first one was Larry Chung. Do you know who Larry Chung is? So I didn't ever talk to Larry Chung, but I just talked to him this week thanks to Dan Chu. So he was the treasurer of the SSAT from 1984 to 1987, and he served as vice president in 2004. So Larry's doing great. Good news. He's 79. He's still working at Providence. He retired from clinical surgery 2 years ago. And he'd be here today if I had only obtained his number earlier. He said he would have come here anyway, except that his wife is pursuing her retirement dream. She's now a private pilot, and she's practicing because she's going to fly transatlantic, he says, and he has to watch the dog. So that's why he's not here. But when I told him, he asked my topic, and he was full of energy. He asked for my topic, and I told him to open the door, and he said, "Open the door. Jennifer, we promised me you have to tell them something. Tell them to use a quote. And ask them, tell them." He said, "Why was I the first Asian officer of the SSAT? Because somebody opened the door for me. Frank Moody opened the door for me." He's like, "I don't know why Dr. Moody paid so much attention to this little boy from Taiwan. He took me everywhere. There were much better people. He had people like Bing Rickers and Bud Shaw. Maybe he was afraid I wouldn't be okay if he left me alone. Frank was so good at sending people to what they were good at. Dr. Moody gave me a chance. I was an IMG. He gave me a chance in the most prestigious organizations in the country, the SSAT and the AAS. And in his own department, he let me in. He even assigned Bing Rickers to teach me English. Tell them, Jennifer, at the SSAT to open the door for others, the way Dr. Moody opened the door for me. This is a great country. Somebody opens the door for you, you can be whatever you want. We need to keep opening that door." So Merit has many faces. And if you look, and if we look, excellence could be found and fostered in many places. At the Society for Surgery of the Alimentary Tract and in the field of surgery, let's open the door. Let's join hands and walk on through together. And let's always remember to look back and see who might be struggling on the path, who needs a map, and put our hand back to help others through the door. So thank you very much for allowing me to be the president of the SSAT.